morning. I want to thank Kayode Lambkin for joining me for our 6th Arts, Media, and Communication Alumni Chat of the semester. I can't believe we're at number 6. I'm Jackie Banks. I'm the Arts, Media, and Communication Advisor here at Colley. And I want to thank those of you who are joining today, and also for those of you who are watching later. Hopefully we'll ask a lot of good questions and you'll get some great answers. So Kayode is a 2021 OPM and marketing graduate. I can't believe it's only been 2021. I still think we are in 2021, so it hasn't been yet out of school that long. So 2021, OPM and marketing, and he is now a marketing analytics analyst at Peacock. So Kayode, thank you for joining today.
Of course.
So first off, can you tell me a little bit about what does it mean to be a marketing analytics analyst? So what does that job function look like?
Yeah, still trying to figure it out myself. So a lot of what I do is pretty data focused. So like doing a lot of polls with SQL, which you can like pull from different data sources and basically tell a story with it. So a lot of the job is basically reporting to executives about trends in viewing on Peacock. So like what shows are people watching? How are they watching them, like devices, as well as specific content titles. Like for the past couple of months, I've been looking into the NFL and like how that's been affecting usage on Peacock. And now I'm looking into more horror/Halloween related stuff. So it pretty much varies depending on what the execs want. So I'd say about half of it is like executive reporting, like ad hoc kind of stuff. And then the other half is like doing my own projects, like scoping out my own things that I think would be interesting. So I think it's a good mix for anybody who wants to like sort of do their own thing and also like report to executives and have high visibility, because the company is pretty small too. It's about 600 to 800 people now, which sounds huge, but compared to most companies, it's pretty small. So you do get a lot of exposure.
So, and you have this great like analytics and data background, and, as you were exploring different things to do, why did you choose more media entertainment? And what do you think is unique about using your particular skills in that field?
Yeah, for sure. I think media and entertainment, that was always my area of interest for a while. I really like movies, really like TV shows, like obviously like watching, consuming, but also thinking about like how they impact the larger world and society. So I think this would be a good place to sort of start my career in the entertainment field by looking at a streaming service where the future is sort of headed. And I think in terms of like, on that note, like analytics is just becoming so much more important in this space, just because all the companies becoming increasingly digital. Like I'm sure you've seen like every company and their mother has like a streaming service now. So that's just where the industry is headed. So I think there's a lot of application for like tech skills in this space. And I think it's a really exciting time to actually be joining the entertainment field if you do have that skill set.
So, I usually ask the skill set question a little bit later, but you brought it up. So usually what I get for students, and we're going to lean hard into like the areas that you really love to do, but if there are OPM and marketing students or computer science students who are watching and they're interested in doing something similar to what you're doing, what would you advise them in terms of like maybe skills that you're seeing that the industry really is looking for? Classes that you wish you took but didn't, or classes you took that were like, yes, thank goodness, or anything you could speak to skill wise?
Yeah, for sure. I think it depends on the role you want. For data analytics, I can speak to that most comfortably just because that's what I do. I'd say the biggest skills that you need to learn are like SQL, which is the coding language to like pull data from different sources. SQL is probably the biggest one. Learning about Tableau, which is like data visualization, and making stuff really interactive and easy to use is probably another skill I'd definitely advise people to learn. And past that, I think it's pretty varies company to company. Like we use Python a lot at NBC, but I know a lot of other companies use R as well as different coding languages. So definitely like spread your wings as much as you can in terms of breadth. But I think those skills of SQL as well as Tableau, I think are the key ones. I think generally too, like any of these kinds of roles, like try and up your communication skills, just because it's not just about like being really good with the tech. You have to actually be able to communicate what you're finding. I'd found that that's probably the most challenging part of the job, just because a lot of people don't really deal with numbers too often in the entertainment space. That is changing, but that's still like very much the case. People are making these like gut intuition decisions, and we have to sort of steer them in the direction of like actually making grounded decisions with data. So I think those two spheres, like communication as well as like Tableau skills and like SQL skills, I think are the biggest ones. In terms of classes, I think stats classes like in the college helped me a lot. Like stats 340, stats 240 were some good ones that I took. I think there's also a data science class, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's math 225, but don't quote me on that. And there's also some good ones if you're an open major that have to do with SQL as well as like doing data viz in Tableau. So I'd recommend any of those. But yeah, I think that's my biggest advice in terms of skills that you need.
Yeah, so it's interesting, I was hearing like I always would have assumed that people were making decisions based on data, but you're saying that it's kind of surprising that people go more on their gut than like then maybe what the data is showing them, or maybe historically they've gone with their gut more than what data is showing them.
Yeah. I think
So
historically, yeah. Like Peacock definitely is the exception. I think most entertainment companies in that data is like super important to them, and like making decisions based on it is like a really important facet of their ethos. But I'd say like a lot of entertainment companies historic have just made it like, oh, this will do well in theaters, so might as well like do it there. But I think that's definitely changing across the board. I think Peacock especially like uses data to the maximum capability. So that's one thing to call out.
do you see a challenge there? Like, have you ever, or is it one of those things where it's kind of challenging? Like when you were talking about communications, I'm thinking like how you express the data, the tech stuff to somebody who, like me, probably has very little understanding. So like, is that a challenge, something that you have to learn, or do you have somebody do you feed the information to another person to kind of present, or is it really down to you?
I think that's the real challenge of the job. It really is down to you, and like being able to distill the information that you've gotten to somebody that might not deal with numbers on a day-to-day basis, and trying to give them all like the most important pieces of information, because you can do like a whole analysis, a whole like project on something really, really granular. But if at the end of the day nobody else understand it, how valuable is that piece of information? Which I think is a really important tip for like data scientists and like anybody working in that kind of field in tech, because you can like come up with the craziest solution, but if nobody understands it who's actually making change in the org, it doesn't really matter. So I'd encourage like that type of thinking whenever you're making or doing a project.
Do you see like, especially in the streaming services, actually, before you can get to that question, because Peacock's kind of new. So have you, which I've actually enjoyed some Peacock shows, and darn it,
Oh, really?
Celia Duffy has said, she's like, don't say that, because she's like, your brain will then, will forget exactly the shows unless you wrote them down. So,
Yeah.
and the ones that I'm thinking about just flew out of my head as I was saying it. But with a new service, like, what do you see that are challenges with Peacock being new, and maybe as it relates to your role, or any observations you might have?
Yeah, I think the real challenge is just, I love the company said this a lot too, is like starting late to the game. Like a lot of other companies had streaming services before, and now we're sort of trying to play catch up. A lot of people sort of view Peacock as like the add-on service, is not like the main one you go to. Like Netflix, you usually think of that as like your go-to service, and then you'll add on all these other ones. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is just we're like super new to the streaming world. But I do think just because we're backed by like a huge company of NBC Universal, like with a ton of content, a ton of like valuable stuff behind it, I think we'll be able to like weather that challenge over time. And I think the other cool thing about Peacock too is there's various tiers that we get to work on. There's like free AVOD, and then there's like, I think premium plus SVOD, where you just don't have any ads. You can watch anything you want. So I think the fact that we have that flexibility with consumers, I think will allow us to be successful in the near future. But again, like it is kind of tough for a new service to like navigate the streaming space when it is so competitive nowadays.
And so that's where your skill set probably really comes in, is to kind of like target the kind of things that people are actually watching, and maybe for how long they're actually watching it. As I'm actually kind of thinking through the things that you might know that I'm just kind of guessing at, is there a particular piece of information? You were saying like what shows have people been watching, but is there certain research that you've been doing that you found like this is really interesting, whether it's something that you can share, because I recognize not all things you can share, but is there anything that you can share that's like, this is a really interesting piece that I've learned or researched from just doing this work in a streaming service?
Yeah. That's interesting. Give me 1 second to think about it, because I think there was one thing that I want to like make sure I say it in the best way. Oh, one thing we've actually been looking into too is like how many people watch stuff on their phones, which I didn't realize a lot of people did. Um, like I personally don't watch many streaming services on my phone or like anything like from streaming services at all, or like pretty much anything. I just like text on my phone and like use different social media apps. But I found that like increasingly, this was even happening like before. I imagine this happens at other companies too, but a great deal of people like use stuff on their phone and just like look into stuff and actually watch streaming services on their mobile device, which I thought was really interesting. Was surprising to me just because like I just don't do that at all. But again, like little consumer like habits that I just like had not thought of before. Really interesting for me to see.
Yeah, I know it's probably proprietary and you can't say a lot, but there's so many things that I'm probably super interested in about that.
Yeah.
So I'll let you go with that one. um, I'm thinking like there's two kind of directions, because we've been talking more just like about the industry, generally, and then we can talk about more of the career stuff, trajectory. But what have you found, and maybe this kind of leads to the other question about like the research you've been doing, but like what are some trends that you've been seeing, whether it's either on the more the analytics side or just in the industry itself, like anything that you're seeing like that's become very popular, or anything that maybe be helpful for people to know whether or not they're going into your particular job function, which is more, data analytics. So any trends around that, or in entertainment?
Hmm. I can speak to both. I think the trend with analytics specifically is like I mentioned before, is the importance of communication skills, which a lot of people didn't think, like you typically think of the guy just like coding in his basement or whatever and just sending it off and not really needing to like talk to anybody. I think that's changing a lot, where you're having stakeholders that don't really know and understand what you're talking about, but have a lot of power and influence in the company because they have a skill set in another area. I think it's becoming more important for like engineers and analysts, anybody with like dealing with numbers on a day-to-day basis, to become better at that kind of skills, like communicating things that are pretty complicated and distilling them very simply for people that just don't do your kind of work. So I think that's like one of the biggest trends I've seen. um I've seen a lot of like navigation to like simpler tools like Tableau to that end, which make things like really easy and interactive for people to use, as well as using yeah, I think that's the two biggest things, like making things simple and like being able to communicate your work really effectively to stakeholders, as well as using Tableau or more often other power like business intelligence tools. I think for entertainment, this has been going on for a while, but I think that a lot of companies are focusing more on content and spending more on content. Like you can see this in like Variety and like Deadline and stuff like that. But a lot of companies are sinking, like not sinking, but they're putting a ton of money towards their streaming services and developing originals, because content is becoming more important for people as they pick which one they want to go to. And that's been going on for a while, but I think it's becoming more important and apparent as there are just a ton of streaming services out, and now becomes more like that's your sort of point of difference when you're making a streaming service and trying to get people from those other services. Like if you're Netflix versus Disney Plus, you want to have the best content, so you've got to pour more money in those services. So I think that's the biggest trend I've seen in terms of the entertainment side.
The other trend I'm thinking of maybe is like COVID, how that's impacted the entertainment industry. Like I'm saying, like, oh, you're at home today. So we did talk a little bit about that, before I hit the record button. But what are you seeing now in the industry? Is there more for students that are thinking about whether they're going into more of the analytics side or creative on the entertainment side? Are you seeing more hybrid? But like that's a reality? Or any other COVID trends that you're thinking that hit the industry that are probably here to stay?
Yeah, I think in terms of the job, like it's definitely it depends on the team that you're working on. So with say if you're doing like production or something, I don't work in production, but I assume you probably have to be in person just because you're like holding the camera and like helping out with different people on set. So I assume that's probably going to be like in person for like the near future until they figure out how to do it a different way. Um, but I think it definitely does depend on the team and the company too that you're working for. I just interviewed with a company that planned to go fully remote for all their roles, like within the next couple of months. And then you have different companies that are planning to do hybrid. And then one of my friends who also works in the industry is doing like in my same like sphere is also work at a different company, is working like fully in person. So I'd say it depends, like on the role in the team. Like it really just depends, which is kind of a non-answer, but it's the classic Georgetown answer. I think another trend too, in terms of like COVID with hitting the industry, I think a lot of day and date movies are coming out now. Like you saw, like I don't know if people have seen on HBO with Dune, like just got released a couple weeks ago. Like that got released on HBO the same time it got released in theaters. So I think that trend is like definitely coming more often because a lot of people still aren't comfortable going out to theaters just with COVID still being a big threat in today's society. So I think that portion of streaming services and like relying on them to be this main distributor for entertainment, I think is one thing that COVID has like definitely affected the most.
Any, I'm thinking before we kind of go into like more traditional, like informational interviews and that stuff. I mean, anything as you're doing in your day to day that you found surprising or I will say, and what you love the most. So anything that you find particularly surprising, you didn't know before, and something that you just can't believe you get to do this all the time.
Something surprising. I was surprised how nice the people at NBC are. Like they're very, very relaxed. I know you should probably expect that from like every company, but yeah, I was surprised of how like welcoming they all are to like a new person. Like I'm the most junior person on the team, and everybody's been super helpful with like helping me in the job as well as like helping me get to know the city more. I just moved out to Los Angeles, so I'm pretty new to the area. So I think that's like one thing that definitely surprised me is how nice and welcoming the NBC family is. One thing that I really like, which I've just gotten to do like in the past couple of days because I just started going in the office, is that the Comcast building, like where Peacock like operates out of, is actually like on the studio lot for like Universal Studios. So it's pretty cool getting to like be on a studio set too. And I haven't explored too much of it yet, but it is really cool just like getting to see like all the sets and like where people actually like shoot movies and stuff like that. I think that's really, really cool. Don't know how many like other companies do that. I'm pretty sure like Paramount does that and maybe Disney, but again, I'm not sure. I've never worked there, but and I think it's pretty cool being on a studio lot. I think that's like the coolest thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can totally see that. I'm thinking too, like at the parent company at NBC Universal, like we were talking before we again hit the record button that they're out in New York too. I mean, what do you, in terms of your particular skill set and what you do, are you pretty much LA based, or is there an opportunity to go to New York if you want to, or into different geographic areas?
Yeah, I think like it definitely depends like team to team, like what you want to do. I think there's a lot of, I think TV is more New York, I believe. I'm not sure. I think film is more Los Angeles generally for companies. Again, I'm not really too sure about NBC. I haven't like delved into it too much. But that probably holds because it's one of the big six still. So I think that's probably the biggest differentiator. With like the business side, I think it definitely depends like team to team. There's a team we work with pretty heavily right now that's New York based, but they have like some like Los Angeles people like scattered around. And with work from home, they've hired a lot of people like during the pandemic. So they've been pretty like location agnostic. And like if you want to stay where you're at, like that's fine as long as you like work the hours that are required of the job. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Um, but yeah, I think those two sectors, like most, I think big six studios, like Disney has an office in New York and Los Angeles. HBO has an office in New York and Los Angeles. So if you want to go to one of those two cities, I think there's definitely a place for you at those big six studios, as well as like entertainment studio or agencies. So I think those two cities are also really fantastic. So you have some good options post grad.
Okay, so now I'm gonna just go over to the other side of and start asking you things about your resume and how you got to where you are now. But if we were to look at your resume leading up to what you're doing now, what would it look like? Is it definitely, were you building more on your analytical skills, or were you using entertainment? So what would that look like? So for students that might be on here thinking that they love that like your intersection of what you're doing now, is that what it looked like or not?
I'd say it's probably kind of a mess. Yeah, I think most people that really fall into career they really like and are passionate about sort of did it on accident. My freshman year, I wanted to be an investment banker, which is like kind of the opposite of what I'm doing now. So I was doing a lot of like finance heavy stuff. So I was doing like the investment fund. I think I did consulting too for a while, as well to sort of like build that skill set. But once I realized I didn't want to do that, sort of like shifted. And then after that, like I'm team speaking just like extracurricular and like professional. I'll go into like the clubs and stuff after. Um, but after I realized I didn't want to do like finance, I think I started doing more like analytics stuff because it still has something to do with numbers and it has really good like career opportunities there. So I interned at Facebook for 2 summers, like doing data science work, which I thought was interesting, but it's again more social media, not really like entertainment focused. I think after that, I sort of wanted to get my foot in the door with entertainment specifically. So I worked at this agency that's based in DC, and this is a shameless plug because they're a great company, Green Bus Agency, which is based in Virginia. Really great company. They have about 30 people. They do like production, graphic design, pretty much anything, and they're starting to do like more tech stuff, which is why they hired me. So yeah, definitely like look into Green Bus Agency. They're super cool. Like hit me up if you want to work for them. Great group of people. But that's what trajectory looked like professionally. In terms of like clubs and stuff, I did do a lot of like entertainment focused stuff since freshman year. So since then, I did like theater. I was doing like Black Theater Ensemble and Nomadic. I did for a season, and I also made a film with GUTV. So that was like my sophomore year. I made that film, and yeah, I think besides that, that was like my entertainment like experience. So it definitely is just like a mix of like pretty much anything. It's not really like you saw this well-defined career path. It was just like I really just didn't know what I wanted to do freshman year. And so I had to pivot. So I'd say that's also good advice for students too. You don't really have to know exactly what you want to do, even like freshman, sophomore year, even junior year too. You really don't have to like solidify yourself into career path. And I think you can definitely like make the argument in their interviews as well as in your resume that these skills that you built in various roles will help you in the one that you're interviewing for.
I love that you were talking about your pivot and that you started very classic Georgetown. I feel like finance was in there somewhere, but
Yeah.
so like I guess while we're there, and because you were here not so long ago, is that the timelines and deadlines for certain industries are very clear and well defined. Finance, consulting being two industries where there's very well defined timelines. Some tech as well, but what would you say for students that are nervous because they're seeing timelines and deadlines what would you say to that, as if they're looking at entertainment or they're looking at analytics and they're, what would be your advice?
Yeah, I can relate to this because I'm sort of like this too. Like all my friends like had offers by the fall and they were like taking them. Meanwhile, like I didn't think I signed my offer for Peacock until like the week after graduation. So like I think my biggest advice is don't worry if you don't have a job yet. It's like if you want to be in this industry, like usually people don't have a job until they need to start like a week or two out. My situation was a bit different because they let me have, I think, like a month or two, like of summer break because I just graduated, which isn't common like at all because I think I interviewed a bit too early too, like because my own stress again was getting to me. Like I think I interviewed like April, like May, and they expected me to start like June. I was like, can I get till July? And they were cool with that. But most entertainment companies, they want you to work like a week or two after you like get the offer. So I'd say the biggest advice is probably just don't be worried if you don't have a job. You'll get one eventually. It's just with entertainment, things move pretty fast. And a lot of people don't really leave their jobs in entertainment. They sort of stay for a while. Whereas with tech, consulting, and finance, there's a ton of churn. So they have to hire these like huge, like 200 class, like amount of people every year because so many people are leaving. Whereas entertainment, it's not really the same. People sort of like stick around for a while at the same company. So I think that's probably my biggest advice. Like, don't worry if you don't have a job, like you'll be fine. Like there's, which, says is easy for me when I have a job and I'm not stressing about it. But if you can trust me, then like you don't really need to be having a job by like fall semester because it's just not how it works for entertainment generally. There are exceptions, but generally that's not really how it works.
Yeah, so I have found that 7+ years of advising in this industry. So, but it's good to hear other students or alumni say that because it normalizes it. So it's one thing for me to say and another for you to say to say that's the truth. I do see there's a question. If you want to stick that in the chat, that's great. And once we're done our conversation, I will pause or end the recording, and then you can ask your questions then. So, but feel free to put it in the chat if you feel like it's a good one for now. So kind of related, I'll ask with the timelines, deadlines things, is informational interviewing. Did you do any of it? Like why to do it? You know, like maybe, you know, it's pretty common, I think, in the industry to I won't say build relationships. I don't want to call it like networking feels always so transactional, and that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be building relationships. So I don't know, maybe you can kind of reflect on your time as a student, like, did you do it? And now that you're kind of a young professional, how would you see? Yeah, we'll call it networking because that's what we call it, but I prefer building relationships.
Yeah, I think for entertainment, like I think a lot of people know traditionally that it is heavily reliant on your network, and being able to like get interviews and get offers is like contingent on getting like being in somebody's network. So yeah, no, I did a ton of informational interviews. When I realized I wanted to work in the entertainment field, like I started for a couple months. I try to do like 3 or 5 people a week, like just on LinkedIn, and like people that I knew, like friends of friends. Like I even talked to like one of my friends' dad, like who worked at Amazon Studios, because I just wanted to learn more about his job and like what he did. Um, so yeah, I think like trying to approach as many people as possible and thinking about like not really trying to necessarily like get a job out of it, I think is probably the biggest thing at the very start, because again, you can wait until like July or when you want to start working. So if you just want to start like interviewing, getting to know the industry, like fall semester is a good like time to do that, as well as like early spring, because you won't be working like until you really want to start like anyway. So you might as well just like build relationships with people. So I talked to a lot of people at different companies that I was interested in. I talked to a lot of people at Hulu, at Disney, HBO, obviously at like NBC as well. And with the informational interviews, I really just tried to understand more about what they're doing in their jobs, and had a lot of interest in like who they were as people and like how they got to their current role. Not really asking questions like, oh, do you like have this specific job opening and like stuff like that, because I think there makes it feel very transactional, which is hard not to do because you want a job, like you're really like desperate for a job. But I'd say like taking a minute to relax and just thinking about, even if it's something that you actually want to do, because there's one company I really, really wanted to work for, which is in entertainment. But once I started getting the information interviews, I realized I did not want to work for that company at all. So that's one like really important piece I would say definitely to go forward with. And so you can talk to anybody that you like see on LinkedIn. I think Alumni is probably the best bet, as Jackie will tell you too. But I think there is like something to be said about like approaching people on LinkedIn, like whether it's like email or like some other way, doing that kind of thing, like where it's sort of cold, you don't really know them, but giving forth your like value add as to like why you want to talk to them and why you think it'd be valuable for them. You might not think you have any value to add like as a student, and like you're just like currently like unemployed, but you kind of do, in that you're like a young person, you have like an interesting perspective on everything, you're like fresh, you're like not jaded by the industry or whatever. So I think like, I guess shooting your shot at those people too, I think is the biggest thing. That's how I got my job. Like my boss's boss is the person I first reached out to. I think like March, April, just to like learn about the company because he had a cool title. So I thought that he'd be cool to talk to at NBC, and he worked at NBC. So I think those two things, and like just being curious about his job and him as a person, allowed me to make a good enough impression that he's like, oh, like if something comes up, well, that's really what you want to go for in entertainment. Like you're going trying to like make an impression, like so that you're both like seem smart, capable, and you're like a good employee to work with, like so that you leave them with that impression. Then if something comes up in like a month or two, they'll like think of, oh yeah, this kid from Georgetown like reached out to me, was super nice, and like seems super smart. Let me recommend him for the job, which is usually the better bet than trying to like apply online to like 50 different jobs. I know for me, I don't think I got a single offer from like applying like on like those job sites. It was usually just a crapshoot. But when I did like the LinkedIn and like reaching out to people specifically, like specific people, I know I got like way more offers there. So I think that's probably my biggest advice, is like trying to build those relationships, so over time you'll get considered for that like job that you really, really want. You could see one that you really, really want now. And you could potentially ask them for it, but make sure that like relationship has been built, because I mean, you could even say like for now, like imagine you as a Georgetown student, a high schooler, like just reaches out to you that you don't know, like asking how to get into school. You wouldn't want to talk to them, right? But if a high schooler just wants to like learn about like what's it's like to go to school at Georgetown, you'll be like, oh, okay, I'll talk to them. Not that you have any influence on the admissions committee, but I think the sort of like it's sort of an analogous situation. We don't really want to be approached and just ask for something right off the bat before you know them. That was a bit rambly, but I hope that answered the question.
No, that was really good. And I really like the part where you were talking about like a whatever employer it was, where you're like, that's the one I want to work for. And then you start talking to people and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
no. I think that's incredibly helpful. And usually when I tell students, it's like, okay, if it's an employer you really wanted to work for, maybe talk to a few people before you make a decision, because you never know if it's the person, or maybe it's even that for you might have been like what was happening in at the employer or at that particular moment. But I think that's incredibly helpful for students to know. It's like you have an impression of maybe what a job looks like or what an employer might look like, but then when you're talking to people, that fills in a lot of things. So really good point. Last question that I had was about the interviewing. Are there any questions that you received during your interview for this particular position that that you might want to tell students to be prepared for, or one that you're like, well, wish I could have handled that one better? So anything that you think of, and maybe you're like, nope, that was all good, all predictable, behavioral, it was fine. But if there's anything kind of related to your job function or anything that you think would be helpful.
I think the best question I got from an interview, this wasn't for my current job, but this was for another one. The best question I got, which I was really stumped on, was what would your recent boss say about your like project that you need to work on? What would he or she say was like the best thing about it? That stumped me for a while, just because like I hadn't thought about that, and that really forced you to get in the perspective of somebody who'd be like supervising you. That's probably what the hiring manager is going to ask you, because they want to see like how your work is viewed by other people and how realistic you are viewing your own work. So I think that's a really big, I'll repeat it again because I didn't really say it in the most concise way. So the question is, how would your previous boss view the prior work that you did? Like, what do you think he or she think that you need to work on? And what would he or she think that you did really good on? All in like a sentence, like not doing like anything more than like 20 words or something like that, I think was the stipulation of his question.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
That's a pause. That's quite a pause there.
yeah.
So that was my last question. I guess what I'll leave with, and then I'll close out the recording, and then those of you who are pressing we can just have a discussion. But is there any I don't know, last advice or anything you can think of, whether it's related to data science, analytics, entertainment, that you think would really be important for students who are listening now or watching in the future that they should know?
I would say like the biggest thing I would say is like don't be put off by some of the job descriptions where it says you need like 6 years of work experience. That's just generally too, but I think a lot of like entertainment and like tech companies sort of put those work experience requirements up there. Whereas like when you're actually applying for the job, like it's more like lenient on there. Like I think those job descriptions are honestly like their wish lists and what they want for candidates. But if you go ahead and you prove that you have the skills without the work experience, you'll usually be able to get away with it. I think that's like my biggest thing. That's just generally, this is not even like entertainment and for NBC. Like I think that's just generally like my biggest advice, because I think that can like make students be put off by certain jobs that they really, really want, but then they see the work experience like, I can't get that. So don't shoot yourself in the foot before you even like try out for the job. So I think that's one thing I would definitely advise. And the other advice I gave too is like for entertainment, like don't worry if you don't have a job, but and it's like April, because you probably like unless you want to start in like on your spring break, you shouldn't have a job yet. So yeah, no, don't like again, don't worry if you want to be in entertainment, don't worry if you don't have a job by graduation, because that's totally normal. Again, I signed mine like a week after I graduated, so you'll be fine.
And that also is very true. But it's really hard to tell students when it seems as though everyone else has a job. It's totally not true. Everyone else does not have a job. But
Yeah.
All it takes is like 2 or 3 people, whatever, around you to have a job, and it does feel like it's only you.
Yeah.
So, Kayode, thank you so much for like answering my particular questions. What I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to stop the record. So for those of you who are watching, hope you enjoyed. For those of you who are with me, hold tight, and then you can just take yourself off video and have a discussion.